Hi Andy, good to see you.
Hi, Paul.
So, another one of our chats. Been looking forward to this for a few days now. I read your work, the work
Yeah,
that we're going to discuss. Um, and it's going to be me chairing again. So there's clearly more things in your head than mine because you're the one who usually does the answering. So I'm once again going to enjoy asking the questions and looking
sure.
forward to doing a bit of learning here. So I know you're keen to talk about, see if I can get the terminology right here, social constructivist meta-ethnography,
Yeah,
which even to me, who is quite keen on reading about methodologies and as you know, I've been in academia for a while now, feels like some quite big long words, and I'm keen to A, test my understanding of those words, and B, maybe get to a place where we can use some other words so that we don't scare people off with those words, which I know sometimes can be the case. So, but yeah, I
completely
guess
agree.
the starting point is for you to give us a little bit of an overview of what it is, how you
Yeah.
got interested in it, and the kind of work you're doing in this area, I guess.
So I think to make it accessible to the listener, the first thing I'll say is if you've done any sort of qualitative work and you've done some thematic work or content analysis and you sort of either looked at or know what grounded theory is, you roughly know the difference between a traditional meta-ethnography and a social constructivist one. So that's the first thing. So I think there's parallels there. So when you think about reviewing, you might need to think about how well developed are different qualitative methodologies, and then can we flip them onto a review scenario? So the basics of something like thematic analysis is you create themes. Might often want to saturate, don't you? Whatever that means. That's another topic, by the way, that we'll talk about, I'm sure, at some point. But with grounded theory, you're looking to develop a model, process, or theory. So you're testing process, the process of questioning, idea generation, testing, going back to the data, sometimes the original data, not getting more. Um, uh, People often, but rather going back to scrutinize, looking at theory, accessibility to different evidence to help you understand um, and develop a core category or thing is really important. So I think if you can think about that, I think it might help you think about qualitative reviews and how they might differ. And essentially my thinking was for empirical qualitative research, we got a lot of methodologies. We got some that develop models, and others develop themes. Very, very crudely. I know we got other methodologies too, but if we think of it on that level, we didn't have that in my view, or developed well enough in my view for reviewing. But we could have it. It was potential, and actually through all the reviews that I've done. Uh, I could often see patterns and ideas and linkages and stuff that wasn't said across studies being implied. And actually, what makes meta-ethnography unique is actually it was originally designed as something that creates ideas generation, creates models or processes. So that was at the heart of it, and that what makes it a bit different to. There's around 13 other qualitative review type techniques or types out there. So there's different review types. But when I looked at those types and when I scrutinized that, my sense was we haven't got one that really develops out ideas for developing theory, process, or models.
So
Um,
Andy, can I stop you there and just check something in terms of my understanding of this, and this
sure.
might sound naive. So an ethnography is a study that would be, if you were doing an ethnography, that would be you as the researcher conducting your own research, and my understanding of an ethnography is where you're really trying to understand cultures, and you're kind of you embed yourself as a researcher into an environment and you're looking at lived experience.
Yeah.
So and a meta-ethnography is where you don't conduct your own research, you actually conduct a review of lots of other people's ethnographies to try and find themes within secondary research. Is that right?
Yeah, that's really interesting that you bring that up. So I think the term ethnography in the meta might send people down a particular rabbit hole.
Right.
And I think meta-ethnography it often represents more of a phenomenological type of approach to generate themes from previous studies. So the ethnography in there, I think is a bit of a
But are
uh,
we looking at ethnographic studies in
not
a
just
meta,
ethnographic. Not no
not
no,
just
but
ethnography?
it can be and often is any type of qualitative methodology. So you've
Okay.
got in there as long as they create data that fits the aims and purposes. That often very different types of qualitative empirical studies get dropped in.
So how is the word ethnography? How do we legitimize the word ethnography then in meta-ethnography if we're not just reviewing ethnographies?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think really what it comes down to is that I don't quite know how because it originated from this text in 1988 by Noblet and Hare,
Yeah.
and that's what they termed this review of qualitative research and meta-ethnography. And then after that, we have other types evolving. Um, so I think it stuck because that's where it originated, and therefore I think you just have to get your head around it. But probably what's more important is what is the right type of qualitative methodological review for what you want to do?
Okay.
That's the most important question probably because there's different types out there. Now, you've got things like thematic synthesis. Thomas and Hardin, 2008, used that a lot. You've also got the meta-ethnography, and that the reason why I like meta-ethnography, it's been quite well developed. So the work by France in 2019 developed a guideline, a very specific guideline for meta-ethnography. And what that did is it's elaborated out the original text. It's got the original author on there. And what you produce often as a meta-ethnography is a set of themes from these qualitative studies and then a confidence statement in the theme. So I think it's a bit like systematic reviewing for qualitative work, creating themes and confidence in themes. So I feel like we're trying to, in some ways, do the same as a systematic review would do, but in a qualitative sense with themes. And then sometimes they'll add on this sort of model or process that's adopted from the data. So sometimes it comes out, that's part of it as well.
So
Yeah.
so would you say that if we accept that the ethnography might be a little bit of a red herring in the terminology here, and actually, if I've understood it, what we're actually looking at is a review of qualitative studies that address whatever it is we're looking at. So it's a sort of meta qualitative research review that we call a meta ethnography.
I think that's a fair statement. The only thing I'd say with regard to social constructivist meta-ethnography
Yes.
is
So that would be good to understand that part of it as well.
because we're adopting in social constructivist grounded theory principles like critical inquiry, where we attempt to take into account taken for granted assumptions or privileges like gender, age, race, status, affiliations, and how they impact on the work. I
Mm.
think that's important for what we get out at the end.
Okay.
So yeah.
So the meta-ethnography, again, stay with me here. The meta-ethnography, the meta bit is the fact that you're reviewing multiple studies that other people have done.
Yeah.
The ethnography bit, it might be a bit of a red herring. We're not going to worry too much about that. And the social constructivist bit is is essentially saying that's where we're targeting our interests. We're looking at social constructivist studies in order to do this meta ethnography.
Yeah, so the social constructivist bit is a pointer
Yeah.
to that form of grounded theory. So where we use the terms, techniques, or ideas from that, we pop them into the meta ethnography.
Okay.
So and the reason I chose that when I was thinking about this is that I think what you end up with a traditional meta ethnography, like I say, is a set of themes and maybe a model or process that comes out that's related to the data. But I don't think that model or process is well developed. It's often not thought, it's often tagged on. If you look at a lot of meta-ethnographies, whereas actually grounded theory is purely designed to create model, process, or theory.
So what's the difference between social constructivist meta ethnography and a grounded theory meta ethnography then?
Oh no, so mine is social constructivist. It points towards the grounded theory nature of the process or terms that I've brought across into reviewing.
Okay, so
So
we've
the
borrowed some
tradition
of the language from grounded theory, but
exactly.
social constructivist
Yeah,
pointer. Yeah.
yes. So if you think of the two meta-ethnographies, traditional ones, you're going to end up with themes, confidence in themes, and maybe a process. With my one, I'm just interested in the model, process, or concept or core category that you develop. So I'm only interested in that, and I'm interested in how in the cycles and processes you go through to get that, and
So,
that's where it differs a lot.
okay, so just yes, humor me here. I might be pushing too hard. So, if we're interested in the models and processes that bring about those models and concepts,
Yeah.
it isn't the process of finding the themes part of that? Isn't
It
that
is
how
part
we
of it,
get the
yeah.
model?
No, no, absolutely. It can be part of it, and there'll be parts that overlap. But when you think about how different grounded theory is to thematic analysis
Mhm.
and what you end up with, it's that different
Okay.
between meta-ethnography and social constructivist meta-ethnography. So I think that's probably the clearest way to think about it. Um,
So that's a good, that I think that's helpful for people maybe listening to this. If they've had some experience with grounded theory, social constructivist meta-ethnography might be an easier shift because it's using similar concepts, language processes, underpinning philosophy, than if perhaps previous work's been done around thematic analysis and starting from a different place. Is that fair to say?
that is fair to say that that's and I think I've got some slides I can probably just show up to talk
Mm.
about some of the key processes if
Okay.
that would help.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's just oh yeah, let me just send that.
There you go.
So
So, as somebody who's largely used thematic analysis, not really used grounded theory, that maybe explains why I was struggling a little to grasp things initially.
yeah, but actually these questions are important, and I think what happens is you get as one does, you get immersed in your text, and then you assume everyone's read everything you've read. I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking at a speed that
Yes.
that relates to that, and there's the problem. So this is a few slides I did for our students the other day. Can you see the screen okay with the
Yep.
slides?
Yep. Perfectly.
So the traditional methodology has six phases, and like I say, you end up with a set of themes, confidence in themes, and maybe a model or process. What we've got here is um, five phases,
Mhm.
but very specific. So when you said to me, "Oh, there'll be similarities, won't there?" And I was like, "Yeah, there will be. Immersive reading, coding is a similarity, and how you set it up initially will be very, very similar, if not the same." However, the critical appraisal will have very specific recommendations around that because of the purpose and nature of what you want to do in generation of a substantive theory that then hopefully leads on to something greater or can be tested beyond the realm and culture or location that you have. Um, and then we've got processes and ideas adopted from grounded theory in there as well to make it slightly different. So we've got this memo in, iterative process of idea generation, and then expression of a theory. Now, what's critical is this iterative process of idea generation, this testing, this retesting, this consideration of what is going on from the data that you're seeing. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Keep in mind terms from social constructivist grounded theory, critical inquiry,
Hmm.
methodological self-consciousness, field notes, diagrams, coding, that memoing,
Hmm.
um, and the development of focus and selective codes. So in terms of the development of codes, again, we got this idea that's translated into a review process that ultimately ends up with categories. So again, it's honoring that social constructivist grounded theory terms. Um, and what's probably critical for the reader or listener today is this iterative process of an idea that you generate. So you might generate some themes and have some comments and themes, and you're thinking about how these things link together. You're using memos to document that. You're being critical of your position. You're trying to look through the eyes of the other person, but you're generating ideas. Could this be linked to this, and this be the outcome, or is this right? And then you're like, well, when does that work? When does it not work? How can I consider this? What do I need to do to test it? is there any other data that I need to look at now based on my idea that would help confirm it, like theory or anything like that? So where do I need to search now? So one of the critical differences is searching. We might do multiple searches. We don't just do one search. So often in reviews you do one search, but this idea generation process needs to be tested and considered, and therefore multiple searches can occur as part of this process. So we're going to go around this cycle essentially testing our ideas and get into a core idea, core category, again, term from grounded theory into here, a core idea that we test. And then once we're happy with that, once we've tested it, search for first things, then we'll express it as a process model or theory.
So Andy, do you have a worked example that we could use here? Because I think a lot of the process you've just talked through there is really useful. But I can imagine, certainly for me, and I'd imagine for some of the listeners, they'd probably go back into that process and engage with it once they were had decided to use this method. But in order to decide whether they're going to use it, I think a worked example might bring it to life a bit, and people go, "Oh yes, actually, that
Yeah.
I'm thinking about something
Good
that
time
could work for."
talking today. So this on YouTube, we've got a worked example recorded the other week.
Okay, yes.
So that's there, but that relates to this paper. So this is in relation to people with chronic lower back pain.
Hmm.
A clinician in practice wanting to deal with uncertainty, emotional regulation, and hope, and how they all interact together, and
Hmm.
what the outcomes are. So that's essentially what Justin's done here, done a great job with it. We haven't finished it here. And what's really interesting, the review process has tested the model, and then we're having to go back and search for more information. So it's almost a cycle in itself following review. This is the model that came out around the unknown. A lot of chronic illness, palliative illness has unknowns. The prognosis often early on. Any process when you go that's through that's medical, they often don't know the answer. What they do is they say what it isn't to find out what it is, and therefore give you a known, if that makes sense, in
So,
terms of a
so this
disease.
model has come. This is an amalgamation, if you like, of different studies that are out there, and through the process of social constructivist meta-ethnography, this model has been drawn from that body of work. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got a set of studies that looked, qualitative studies that looked at the experiences of people and the interaction that occurs between physio and patient. And then we've looked at how do they deal with situations where there's unknowns. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what changes are coming through. That creates a lot of turmoil. That can create a lot of challenges. It's a challenge for the clinician and it's a challenge for the patient. And what is going on with that? And what are the concepts that are going on there? And what's the outcomes that can result when it goes wrong or when it works?
Mhm.
So it's looking at that, but then so after that initial look at that literature, those experiences and grouping them and thinking, well, what's the issue here? What are we going to focus on? And we focused on emotional regulation with these situations where we're dealing with an unknown concept. We then said, well, what are the theoretical concepts we understand here? So emotional regulation was one, hope was one. Um, is there any other in there? They're the main two. Uncertainty was the other. So you look then we got to go back and start looking at the theories around that and think what helps us understand this, what feeds in here, how can we further understanding in terms of the gap and the
And that's
knowledge.
the iterative process at play there.
Yeah, that's a good example of that. Yeah.
And the methodological self-consciousness, is that another way of saying that you're very reflexive, or is it a is it
Yeah, yeah. So that's taken on board. If you got a team, different perspectives, field notes. It's taken on board. If we just come back to the term, I think we've got it here. Field notes and meetings, others codes. Uh, it might be diagrams, tables to help compare ideas.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so that comes in there alongside memoing, which is your connections. So that starts early on, and feeds into the challenge to to what's being shown. So it's important as important to challenge things as it is to just to accept it.
Mm.
So does it has that helped clarify, or is there any gaps you thinking actually I still don't quite get this or that?
No, I do. I get it. And I guess like most sort of qualitative methodologies, yeah, I can see similarities to other traditions, if you like. So thematic analysis, we talk about being very reflexive. The different words, and I'm not trying to say they're the same thing, but different words to explain similar processes. I wonder if I could push you on the worked example so that you've given me an existing study that you've been involved in there.
Yeah,
Uh, can I take you outside of your discipline and
yeah,
bring you
please
into
do.
mine? So, if we were looking at sport coaching, coach development, so we're either looking at how we develop athletes through creating great sessions and building good relationships with them, or how we support coaches to be better at their work.
Yeah.
What might where might we use this sort of framework to go and
Yeah.
explore something there? And you might not have it on the tip of your tongue, so by all means, come back.
No, no, no. And this, do you know what everyone that's listening? These are the meetings you need to get a coffee with your mate and have a chat with your different disciplines. Really important, right?
Mm,
So for me, you got to think psychosocial sort of theories that might be at work.
yeah.
I'll think about the different outcomes that can result from interactions, and what you think's important there. So you obviously you grounded like grounded theory in the interview studies. So you've got a
Hmm.
set of studies that are giving you processes that are going on, maybe different outcomes. So I'd say, well, what are the outcomes that are happening here? When it works, when it doesn't work? What could be feeding into that? Are there any central factors that are feeding into good coaching outcomes or bad coaching outcomes? And then what are those outcomes? Okay, what does that relate to? Does it relate to a successful shot? Does it relate to a better feeling, more confidence?
Hmm.
So I think you've got to think, well, what is it that's coming out here from these studies? What's feeding into that? And is there any clear processes that are happening or uh, factors that are affecting this consistently and very broadly? And how can I test that? And is there any theories that might be feeding in that can help me explain that or help me identify that?
So if we were to look at motivational theory, my work around person-centeredness, which is kind of psychosocio, bit of philosophy in there, and then I was talking to you before we came onto this call around ecological dynamics and it's kind of pedagogical theory, really. So if we were to take those three, um, there are bodies of work around that coming from those three different perspectives.
Well, could I just get the pause? Could we just pause recording just 2 seconds, Paul? Be straight back.
Yeah.
Recording.
Okay, you're back. So could you see some mileage in coming, taking the work from those different perspectives and seeing if we can find a model where they all contribute? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I would say, firstly, I would ground it in the qualitative studies that have looked at the interactions between coach and player, is it,
Yeah.
in a certain setting, um, and I would say, right, pull out the results from that, the quotes, the interpretations by the authors,
Hmm.
and say what's going on here, what mechanisms might be a result, what are the outcomes you want to focus on, high motivation, low motivation as a result, for example. It might be another confidence, or it might be another what's the outcome. So let's look at what's coming out here.
Yeah. So it might be performance, it might be confidence, it might be connection, engagement, whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then you look at qualitative for what qualitative does best, really, which is the hows and whys.
Hmm.
Why does it work? Why doesn't it work? How does it work? and then what's consistent across the studies? What can you test? So you might have several things you want to look at. You think, well, I think this leads to this, and this is the outcome, which is where it's positive. But actually, this can lead in these situations when this is said or that's referred to. Actually,
Mm.
I've seen outcomes be like this, and I've got evidence for that. So that's an
So I
idea.
guess we might find there a hunch I would have would be that all those different bodies of work would all probably, whether they use this terminology or not, would probably talk about some form of autonomy support for athletes
Yeah,
or
lovely. Yeah.
and that might be a theme or theme that we don't work in themes, but that might be
I
something
think it's an
that
idea. It's an idea for connections.
mm,
So if we're talking about how motivation works, then you've got your self-determination theory, autonomy, belonging, and what have you within there. So I'll go and look at that. I'll look at any other motivation theories I think that might help explain what's going on. But then obviously I want to put it in context. And that's where you're grounded in the data is so important. So you might start pulling out codes, but at the same time as you're doing that, you've got your memos that you're writing. Why is this connected to that? What's going on here?
what's
What
a memo?
result?
What does a memo look like? Is that you
Just be
get
a little
the
your
data
field
and
diary, yeah. Where you
writing
just
a
write and
comment?
say, yeah. You're it's sort of going beyond comments really in the sense that you're saying, well, what are the connections here? And what where I would point the reader to at this point is I'd say in my framework paper, I asked lots of questions. I asked the meta-ethnographer to ask lots of questions. I would be answering those questions, literally answering the questions that I pose. So um have a look through that paper and you'll see these questions and are literally part of the field diary and the memos that you create would be answering those questions. Part of it would be saying, well, what mechanisms do I see here? What's important? What seems to result? What's the connection between A and B or A and C? And so you're starting to inform that. Why is that? Why is it that connection? Is it for a particular reason? And then I start questioning that. Does it always occur across papers? Is there situations where it doesn't occur? So this is this challenging your idea to think, does the idea need to be refined? Doesn't it work? Do I need to focus on something else?
So
Yeah.
so this at its very base level, it's essentially sits under the family of types of literature review.
It does, yeah. It is a form.
And have you got, so have you had undergraduate students using this process, or is this more master's level, PhD, or do you not think it's a level thing?
That's a really, really good question. My only worked example I've done with Justin so far, it has taken a lot of time.
Mm.
So time's a factor. So uh, I would say that's the most critical factor and a willingness to go beyond just your set of initial studies because actually that whole process you can imagine just balloons out and before you know it you're having to search different ideas, theories, concepts to see if that can contribute. Um, so I would say it's a challenging process. I don't think it's beyond undergraduates. I think as long as the undergraduates willing, interested, motivated by that,
So time,
um,
that's crucial. I can see that.
but time is absolutely central. So if you can't devote a lot of time to it, be very careful with this sort of thing.
Yeah, okay. And then I don't know whether this is sort of drawing to a close here, but I wonder what your take is on people who would be critical of this approach. So we're always encouraging our students, aren't we, to talk about both
Yeah.
perspectives and to entertain, critical perspective. What do the naysayers say about this? Are you aware of?
Fantastic. It's a really important question because so many times you see a new methodology or approach and just like, are they doing that just for citations? And it's really important. Honestly, I was I'll be very cautious about producing anything that would do that. It came out of me thinking about paradigms and worldviews and actually I guess the question for me was, is there something that really, if the purpose originally, or one of the purposes originally of this approach was to develop theory or models, can
Mm.
you actually do it with existing approaches? And honestly, I didn't think you could. Now, I'm happy for someone to write to me and say, actually, there's this thing here or that. I have reviewed them in like my not the framework paper, the previous paper. I've reviewed, looked at at the different approaches. And I didn't think there was enough in detail, and that's why I felt like something that's really well developed, like social constructive grounded theory, with all its process models, almost it was begging to be done, really.
Where do we stand with this? I guess I'm trying to be the naysayer here. So if I push you on this, if I were to conduct my own qualitative study,
Yeah,
and it was robust and good data, and I spent some time doing it, and from that created a model
yeah,
or conceptual model that I thought was useful, and then somebody took that work and introduced it into their own social constructivist method ethnography,
yeah,
and they are essentially looking for synergy across a number
yeah,
of different studies, but those studies have been done in different contexts, potentially at different times.
yeah,
And then that researcher is making a claim that they can see similarities across those studies. I then see that new model
yeah,
and I'm there going, well, yeah, but this is such a different, you've amalgamated all these different contexts. I don't think it's fair to make the call that you're making, whereas my model is very specific to the context in which the research was conducted. So where do we go? Is that just a bad version of a meta-ethnography?
I think that obviously it depends on what comes out really, but the whole idea for me of this is that we're creating new ideas for how things work.
Mhm.
So it's innovation. Now, I think we've lost that a lot in academia. We end up doing our like, let's move the goalpost a little bit further, and we'll just add this to the literature or that to the literature. My hope for this thing is that it takes a giant leap or says, actually, you can look at it completely differently. So, in your example there, they've given maybe a worse version of what you've developed and you developed it well, and there will always be that. But the best version of this would be I'm going to look at this completely different. I'm going to blow it all up. This is always thought of in this way, this theory, but actually it can work like this. And so for me, it's about challenging, innovating. I don't honestly care if most of the social constructive methodologies aren't right.
Yes, well, yeah, well, we know
But
that
maybe they give an idea
it
that
probably isn't
sparks
such a thing
something,
as
that
right.
changes something, that we can innovate and develop. And so I think it should be used as a catalyst for change and for innovation.
Okay, well, I love that, Andy, and I think you're right. And I often find myself saying to students with qualitative projects, look, this isn't going to change the world, this study, but it might move our thinking forwards a little bit. It might help somebody to see things a little bit differently. So yes, if this provides us the opportunity to essentially gather the great work that qualitative research can do and actually go, right, we've got enough studies to take a bigger step. That's really, that is exciting. I like the sound of that. So innovation, a methodology for genuine innovation.
Yeah,
Maybe that,
that's my hope. That would be the hope for it. Yeah,
okay, I love that. Do you think there's anything we've missed in this conversation? I know we wanted to make it quite punchy and we wanted to make it
yeah,
accessible. And I think we've possibly started our conversation with it was quite term heavy.
yeah.
I was hanging in there, but it feels like we've got to a place now where we're talking in more normal terms. I hope it makes sense to people.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think there's always a danger when two academics start chatting that you end up chatting on your level and can't bring it down to the right level. But hopefully there's a
Mhm.
few analogies in there that might help. And so yeah, I think we've got to a happy place where uh
It certainly helped me, Andy.
yeah.
I understood all the words in social constructivist meta-ethnography as individual words, but I wasn't quite sure what they meant altogether. And I've kind of got that now. I can see how it might apply in my world. And sadly, you said it takes a lot of time, but if I can find that time, I'd be quite keen to give this a go.
Yeah, I would be excited. I mean, the most important comment from you, Paul, is that you think you could apply it in your discipline, and so I think therefore we've got to where we want to be with the podcast today. Yeah.
Yeah, great. All right, listen, thanks for your time again, Andy,
Yeah,
and we'll catch you soon.
yeah, great.
Cheers, bye bye.